Hi, I'm Danita Westman, the well-rounded fiberista and your fiber arts teacher. I wanted to start today in my first official video here on YouTube, answering one of the most common questions that my students ask me after the first lesson and they first learn how to work their yarn or their needles or their fiber, and that is, what do you keep in your notions bag? What do you keep in your project bag all the time? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that today because the answer is, it depends. If you've taken one of my classes in person, or you've joined Zooms online, or you've followed me on other social media, you may have heard my favorite and most versatile answer, but the honest answer to most question in the fiber arts, which is the answer to nearly every question in fiber arts: it depends. And I've lovingly purloined that from Abby Frankamont. She has written about that and talks about that regularly. And the truth of the matter is, it really does depend. So after we go through what I keep in my notions bag that gets tossed in whatever my project du jour is, we're going to talk about how you can make those choices and figure out what depends for you. So like a lot of knitters, I have a big notions bag. So this is probably the size of a 5x8 card. And it has all the things that I might need. And this is a bag that moves with me from project to project. I can pull it out, drop it into a different project bag, and have what I need. So let's go through what's inside of it here. Mandatory for any of my notions bags is a good sharp pair of scissors with a case. This case will come in handy, and it prevents not only the scissors from destroying your notions bag, but also your project inside your project bag. These are actually scrapbooking scissors. They're made by the Cutter Bee, and oh, here we go. They're made by the Cutter Bee. I don't know if they still make them. I've had them around for a long time. They really are as ever sharp as the case implies, and they have a nice precision edge, and the case goes on and clicks. The cover clicks into the thick side of this metal grommet, so the case will not easily come off. The next thing that I always keep in my bag is a chibi with darning needles, and I keep a selection of sizes of darning needles because you never know what size you're going to have. And the size of needle only matters as much as will your yarn go through the eye of the needle. This is one that's good for bulky yarns, and you need your yarn to be able to fit through that eye without shredding. I wouldn't use this on a fine gauge project, but that's why I have a selection of other needles that also live in that same chibi of varying sizes. So you can see here I have several sizes of eyes. I would say that the third absolutely mandatory item in your notions bag should be a tape measure. I like to use a dressmaker's tape, and the reason for that is you'll never have a measurement that's longer than the 60 inches that your dressmaker's tape allows. Also, it has nice clear measurements in metric on one side and standard on the other, so regardless of the unit of measure that your pattern is written in, you're covered. I prefer a dressmaker's tape to a retractable tape because not all dressmaker's tapes are created equally, and depending on the type of material that your dressmaker's tape or your measuring tape is made out of, those retractable ones can stretch over time just by nature of being under tension that makes them retractable. So I like to use these because they won't stretch because they're not held under tension. If you have an older retractable tape and you want to ensure that it has not stretched and that what's showing is actually an inch, you can always grab, a fixed ruler like this and compare it and see if it's stretched and if it's true or not. I heard that probably 10 years ago and was shocked and kind of horrified, and I went and checked every retractable tape measure I had, and some of them had indeed stretched. Some of them hadn't stretched almost 1/8 of an inch. So that can make or break a project, especially if you're trying to do something fitted like a sock. An extra 1/8 inch on the foot of a sock can mean the difference between an acceptable amount of ease and too much ease, and make that sock bag in your shoe. A stretch measuring tape that's inaccurate could cause you problems over the course of a project. So something to be aware of, and gives you an excuse to buy a cute new measuring tape if you need to. Those 3 things are the absolute mandatory things in a project bag for me. The rest of these things are helpful, but they're not absolutely essential. One thing I like to carry with me is a marking pencil of some sort. Pen, pencil, something. So in my Notions bag, I do have a highlighter that I carry if, maybe I missed a page of my pattern and I didn't mark something, or I highlighted my sizes, my numbers for my size, and I missed something. I've got a highlighter. Also, if I find something that gives me pause, I can grab it and mark it right then and then investigate it later. Another thing that I like to have is an erasable colored pencil, like a marking pencil, like this one. This is literally just in the stationery aisle. It's not a specialty. It's not a sewing pencil, anything like that. This is made by Papermate. It's called a Clear Point, and it's a mechanical pencil. It comes with colored lead, so you can see there. And it has an eraser built in because it is erasable. It's not going to erase all the way like a soft lead pencil on paper, but it erases enough that you won't confuse yourself. I like to use these as opposed to a traditional pencil, because in a printed pattern or a black and white book, this blue stands out more than, say, a black pen or a regular soft lead pencil, like a number 2 pencil. So I have one of these that I either use in blue or purple. Sometimes they're handy to have both of them. They're good for marking things like increases during cables, or anytime your directions say at the same time. You can have your size measurements marked in one spot and your at the same time directions marked in a separate color to make sure that your eyes know where to look on your pattern. Another thing that I like to keep in my Notions bag is a cable needle. And this is a Leslie Wind cable needle that I've had for several years. It slides right on your finger, and you can use it as you need to and then slide it back onto your finger. I like to put it onto my right hand because I carry my yarn in my left. And so my working yarn is over here, and my cable needle can just hang out over here, and it's not going to get caught on anything until the next time I need to turn a cable. Another thing that I carry in my tool bag that I recommend is a good idea is one of these fix-a-stitch tools. And they come in different sizes, as you can see. There's 3 end sizes, and here's the opposite end. So they work for a variety of sizes of yarn. These tools are really handy for fixing drop stitches, or if you're doing, maybe a crochet bind off, if you want to use a crochet whip stitch seam, totally workable for something like that, and are just a little bit easier and a little quicker than working your way back up with just a knitting needle alone. If you've got one, put it in your tool bag. Don't let it sit at home in a drawer where it can't help you. The last few things are things that are personal that I find helpful and that I use more some than the tools that I include over here. So one of the things I like to carry is a nail file. This is a crystal nail file in a case, because nothing to me is more annoying than having a rough spot on a fingernail or on a cuticle and having it catch in my yarn with every stitch. So grab your nail file, smooth that out, and then you can get on your day. Along those same lines, I also like to carry a little unscented lotion bar. I don't like to use scented lotion bars because then that smell can get into your yarn. Some fragrances can mess with dye, and I don't want to risk that. But an unscented bar should just stick into your hands and not rub back off onto your fiber or onto your project. This lotion bar came from Tuft Woolens, and she's local to me, so we always like to support those local makers. Another thing that I always carry is chapstick, because chapstick is life. This one came from the Barmaids. And the last thing that I always carry is for people who use interchangeable needles. I always recommend that my students carry a little baggie with a cable key so that if your interchangeable needle gets loose while you're working, you can tighten it back up. I also recommend that they always carry a pair of the little end caps that go on your interchangeable needles in case something would happen, if a needle tip would break, if a needle tip somehow gets lost, it comes unscrewed in your bag, falls out. If you need to change needle sizes and you need to put the project down, putting these caps on will stand as a reminder to change your tip size so that you don't keep cruising through the ribbing and knit all of your ribbing on the wrong size needle. It's just a handy thing to have. I usually keep them in the tiny plastic baggie that they came in with my needle set, so that's where it lives in my notions bag as well. It's just in a tiny little baggie. You can also keep a length of waste yarn in your bag for holding stitches under arms or doing afterthought heels and socks, things like that. I find that I enjoy using a light colored, smooth textured yarn for waste yarn. I prefer to use mercerized white crochet cotton, so I keep a length of that around, especially in my sock knitting bags for heels and things like that. Another thing that's always a good idea to have around is a spare container of stitch markers in a little tin or a little bag of some sort, so you've got extra stitch markers. Somebody always needs one. If you keep a few brass jump rings like this around, they're cheap, they're easily replaceable. You can always hand one to somebody at knit night who needs a stitch marker and forget about it and not look back and not worry about breaking up a set. Put down in the comments below what's your number one non-negotiable or top 3 non-negotiable items that go in your notions bag every time you need to knit. You have to have these 3 things. I'm curious. I'd love to know. Depending on the project and how many things I have going at once, I may have anywhere to 4 or 5 smaller notions pouches going other than my master notions pouch. And that's going to very much depend on what the project calls for. If I have a project that changes needle size, I always like to have a needle sizer in my bag so that I can confirm I've grabbed the right needles to put in my bag when I was preparing my project. And I also want to make sure that I'm changing to the right size needles as my project calls for at the time, whether it's going from a circular needle to double points as the circumference changes, or if you're changing from stockinette to seed stitch or ribbing. Anything that affects your gauge may call for 2 or 3 or more needle sizes in one project. And it's always good to have one of these around to double check and make sure that you're in fact working with the size needle that you think you are. It's really embarrassing to admit, but I have done this where I grabbed the needle out of my bag and grabbed the wrong one and didn't notice it until hours later. And there's no fix for that other than live with it being too big or take the needles out and rip it back. For my autopilot projects where I know my numbers, I don't need a pattern, I don't need to look at anything written down, I just go, like socks, for example, I have a pared down notions kit that I carry. And the things that have to go in that kit are some sort of a snip. If it's not a scissor like this, it can be a yarn cutter or a yarn nipper, a smaller pair of nippers. Any of those round razor cutters works great. And I also make sure I have a tape measure all the time and a bit of spare waste yarn, a smooth neutral colored waste yarn if I'm doing an afterthought heel or a contrasting toe and heel. So another example of a pared down notions kit is my hat kits. My hat tool kits actually live in a pencil case like this that I got from a big box office supply store. You can see I've got a sticky note on the front with my notes of what's in this notions kit and what should go back in when I'm done. But when I open it up, I have a little needle on a little felt pup that I got from my LYS 614 Knit Studio. This is their Studio Pup Pearl. And I have a small pair of scissors with a round tip. I have a tape measure. I've checked this one. It does match up. It's not stretched out yet. And I have a crochet hook that matches my millimeter size on my needle. I knit a lot of muscle burra hats. Muscle burra is a pattern by Ysolda, and it calls for Emily Ocker's circular cast on, which requires a crochet hook. So I keep one in the kit all the time. And then I also have a little yarn butterfly of mercerized crochet cotton, just in case. You never know when you need some waste yarn. So that goes along with my double pointed needles and my 16-inch circular needles that I use for that particular hat. That's a tour through everything that goes in my knitting notions bag. I do have separate pouches and tool bags that I keep for my weaving and my spinning tools, and I'm going to show you those coming up soon in another video as well. Let me know if you have questions down in the comments. Let me know what your non-negotiable objects are that you take the house with you when you leave. Let me know if you like to live dangerously and you just throw your needles and yarn in a Ziploc and don't take anything. Tell me down in the comments below if this has been helpful or anything else you'd like to share with me. Have a great day and keep playing with your fluff. One other thing that I carry in my notions bag that wasn't in there because I've clearly stolen it. That doesn't need to say. Why am I saying that? Okay. Another example of a more pared down notions pouch would be my hat kits. And my hat kit is, why don't I just show you? Nobody wants to hear about it. I can tell you. This is YouTube. I can show you.